Today, we're really switching things up. My producer, Rinke, interviews me, and she just may be vying for my job. I figured that I couldn't ask my guest to be vulnerable without being willing to go there myself. She takes us through my life's journey from childhood to high school and college, early career to major career shifts. We really go there. I open up about what it really means to lead from the heart, the moments that defined my career, and some of the sacrifices and mistakes that I made along the way. She pushes me to share lessons on courage, resilience, and strength, and what it takes to show up authentically in every role. I'm not going to lie, this felt a little self-indulgent, but I keep being reminded how important it is to share my experiences. Have a listen and feel free to go to thecoeffect.co to learn more. Hey y'all, let's go there.
All right, Carla. Well, I'm so excited to be sitting across from you today.
Me too.
This is so fun. It's such a long time coming for us to be sitting in these chairs after brainstorming, meeting, crying, laughing.
Yeah, this is a full circle moment for us.
Yes, it is.
We met when you were interviewing me.
Yeah, that's exactly how we met. It was over Zoom. It was COVID and it was at IBM.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what I was doing with anything.
Well, you fooled me.
Well, that is something that I have no idea how, but here we are. And now we're face to face in completely new parts of our life.
Who could have predicted it?
My God, never. And it's the best surprise and the best journey that we've gotten to be here.
I agree.
So I think to start for today, I would love to hear about Carla, and not just Carla from 2020 to now, but Carla from age 3 to age 6 to when you were a teenager to then a little bit into that transition into college. I know you touched a little bit on who you were and that growth, but really what brought you to sit in this chair today? All of the ups and the downs, all of the trials and tribulations to make you the beautiful human you are, the person that's changing lives and changing the world. But you started somewhere. So let's start from the very beginning. Where were you born and where did you spend your childhood?
Oh my gosh, this is going to take some time. We may need multiple episodes for this. Okay.
I love it.
I was born in Montreal to Uruguayan parents. So I'm French Canadian, South American, and very Texan. We actually moved to Dallas when I was 5. So I was raised in Dallas. And English, believe it or not, was not my first language. So I learned French and Spanish simultaneously. My father spoke French to me. My mother spoke Spanish. So I was under the impression, apparently when I was little, that all men spoke French and all women spoke Spanish. I got confused at one point. And I learned English through Sesame Street when we came to the States. And then eventually when I got to school, I started to learn it in elementary school.
Wow. That is really impressive. So you speak all 3 languages still?
Well, French, I would say I'm super rusty. I need to get immersed. I joke that I'm a 2-beer French speaker, but I definitely understand it and I can read it, but I've started to lose it.
How do you think you grew differently from just somebody born in Texas having these different cultures shape you? You had, like you said, Uruguayan parents, but born in Montreal, and then you ended up in Texas. Those are all 3 very polarizing cultures.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many things that impact me as a result of that. One, I'm filled with a tremendous amount of gratitude for my parents. They left friends and family behind, not once, but twice for us to give us a shot at a better life. And I'm super grateful to that because those were major sacrifices that they made on behalf of us. So I'm very thankful to them. I think the biggest gift they gave me and my sister is the gift of Spanish and the gift of being able to live in this country. And I feel a tremendous responsibility to pay that forward, not just to them, but to everyone. The other thing I would say is growing up in Dallas in the 80s, there wasn't as big of a Hispanic population in Dallas. And there certainly weren't Uruguayans. So people didn't quite get the fact that I was Uruguayan. They didn't understand that. And what's interesting is I'm a bit of a chameleon. My husband actually calls me geographically ambiguous. And that wherever we go, it doesn't matter where we are in the world, someone always stops me for directions. And it's almost a running joke with us. And I think that's because I don't really quite fit in anywhere, which means I fit in everywhere. And so that really influenced me. So growing up, I felt like, okay, well, when I go back to Uruguay, I'm considered Rinke. So because I've been Americanized, when, I certainly wouldn't be accepted as French Canadian, given the fact that my French has kind of evaporated. But yet at the same time, I'm not like everybody else. And I grew up in a household where my parents only spoke Spanish and they speak other languages, but in the house, for us to learn Spanish and preserve it, they made it a rule that we would only speak Spanish in the house. And I grew up with a very South American mindset. My parents were very strict. I wasn't allowed to do the things that teenagers were typically allowed to do. It's funny, they have a very different recollection of it than I do. We've talked about it recently. But yeah, they were fearful. They were alone in this country without support. And there was a bit of a culture shock moving to a new country. And they didn't particularly feel like it was the safest place for two girls to be running around in. So my sister and I grew up with a lot of rules. We weren't allowed to do the typical things that kids were allowed to do.
Can you describe your parents a little bit? What were their careers and what brought y'all to Texas?
Yeah, my parents are super cool. Both of them were in the fashion industry. So they came over, they were involved in textiles in Montreal. And then they decided to start a fashion line, a clothing line. And that's why they moved to the States. And at the time, they wanted to move to a city that had an apparel mart. And so that made the options New York, Dallas, or LA. And they got off the plane. The story goes that they got off the plane in December in Dallas and it was 80 degrees. And my mom said, we're staying here because I know she missed the Uruguayan climate being in Canada where it's so cold, in Montreal in particular. The other thing that's really interesting, which we came to realize much later, is that Dallas is the same distance from the equator. Now, my family says this. I've never actually checked it. So if somebody fact checks me and I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But Dallas is the same distance from the equator that Montevideo is. And so interestingly enough, there were a lot of similarities in terms of the foods, the cowboy culture. So it felt very, homey to them.
Yeah.
Minus the beach, of course.
That is so funny. I know we talked about this, but you just said Montevideo, and it reminds me of this song that we learned when I was in middle school and we had Uruguayan students come in.
Oh, that's right. You guys had Uruguayan.
Chiquita es se llama Montevideo. I don't know if is that the city's or country song? I don't even know.
No idea, but that's hilarious. Yeah. Uruguay is such a small country and the population, if I'm not mistaken, is roughly about the same as Austin. So the fact that you knew Uruguayans just blows my mind. And it's such a small population, but yet everybody knows a Uruguayan, which blows me away.
It's so funny. They were always coming to our school. Was one of my first boyfriends was one of the exchange students. So
wow.
Oh yeah.
So you dated a Uruguayan boy?
I did. It was scandalous. It was scandalous.
That's so awesome.
He was older. My mom probably is like, what? She'll listen to this and say, who was this?
That's
I was
amazing.
in middle school though. So
that's amazing.
Okay.
So my parents were super cool.
Yeah.
They started a clothing line, and I would also say that while they were very strict and protective, they were also very liberal in other ways. They had a lot of friends in the gay community. My mom really encouraged us to get involved in theater and put us in improv. She was always finding ways to expand our education in kind of different, unique ways, sending us to a pilot program school that was for the talented and gifted. And just, she was always doing that. And then, my father always made an effort to expose me to things. So he got me into photography at a very young age and into sports. I always joke that I was his missing son. And they were very into the arts and would take us to go see contemporary dance performances. They were super into Pilates. They exposed us to a lot of creativity at a very young age and super interesting people, which was really super cool.
What a colorful childhood. Sounds like it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So talk about how that carried throughout high school. You shared a little bit when we were getting coffee the other day, a little bit about your expression and how you dressed and showed yourself through your hairstyles and colors and clothes. So paint a picture of Carla in 9th, 10th, 11th grade.
Yeah, me and my sister both. It's an interesting thing because, well, I would say I went through a really intense, awkward phase. So in middle school, I had severe acne and super frizzy curly hair before the advent of mousse or keratin, and I had glasses and braces. I mean, just hot mess. It's a super awkward phase. And then to add to it, I was punk. So I would dye my hair like super jet blue black. And, you know, my parents let me and my sister express ourselves creatively that way. You know, they really let us explore different fashion choices and never made us feel weird about it. And my mom would dye my hair for me. So they were very supportive in terms of that creative expression. I would also say simultaneously, Dallas in the 80s, there was a lot of racism. And, you know, I was talking about it not being a very significant Hispanic population. And so there would be times where I would be confronted with it and it would shock me. And I could be a bit of a chameleon of sorts, as I mentioned. So, you know, I present as white and American, but at the same time, my sister and I, probably early high school for me, maybe junior high, were swimming at our neighborhood swimming pool one day, just the two of us. And there was a father there with his two young toddlers. And my sister and I were speaking Spanish to each other. And I'll never forget this. He yanked the kids out of the water so fast and spat on us. And so there were weird things like that. Or I would be carpooling with a friend and their father would make a racial slur and say something about Spix, forgive my language. And that would just kind of like shock me. So there was also that. So while I was also exploring my creativity and expressiveness and, you know, definitely not beautiful, I was also kind of dealing with the identity of being Hispanic and how much I wanted to put that out there based on some of the reactions.
As you grew up, how much did you lean into that side of you, that Hispanic side of you? Did you hide it or did you learn to embrace it?
You know, it's a great question. I never rejected it. My parents will probably say that my sister and I resisted it a little bit because we didn't want to be different. But
Yet you had blue and black hair.
Right, exactly. I would just say I didn't resist it. And then as I went to college and university, my minor was Latin American studies. And so I started to explore that side of my family more. And in fact, I did a research project when I was at the University of Texas with one of my professors, one of my Latin American studies professors, about immigrants, Hispanic immigrants and assimilation in the 80s. And we found something really interesting, which was most immigrants that came to the U.S. during that time frame, it discouraged their children from speaking Spanish because they didn't want them to be discriminated against. But my parents, having gone to Montreal first, which is extremely diverse and extremely inclusive, didn't have that perspective when they came to Dallas. So they had no idea that we would encounter racism. So they actually encouraged us to speak Spanish, which again, I think is a total gift. I think that's a great thing. But it wasn't until I did that research project and started to explore more the cultural aspects of my background that I recognized, oh, wow, this is really special that we had this experience because most people in my generation did not.
It is really beautiful that they encouraged y'all to hold on to that identity. My grandmother came through Ellis Island. She's Italian. So my mom is half Italian. I'm a quarter. And my mom never spoke Italian growing up. They tried to fully be American and fully embrace the American culture. And it wasn't until we really, encouraged my grandmother to teach us all of her tricks and heritage and just things that made her our Nona, that we learned more about the Italian heritage. But you're right. It's more common that they tried to dismiss and hide that heritage rather than embrace it.
Totally.
So it's beautiful that that was encouraged in your household.
Yeah, absolutely. How does your mom feel about it now?
So it's funny because my great-grandmother, so my mother's grandmother, was very Italian and very proud. So she embraced it. But my grandmother, I guess my great-grandmother's daughter, didn't. So there was a little bit of a clash there because my Grandma Nona, which is my great-grandmother, she loved it. And she was the big Italian personality woman cooking for everybody in the family. Yet my grandmother did not lean into it as much. So my mom continued to try to pull it out of her mother, but relied on her grandmother, my great-grandmother, to keep it alive throughout our family. And we always have little Italian things here and there. Like we call my mother Noni with my nieces. So there's things here and there that we still hold on to and have grappa when we need something before we go to bed and just little bits here and there.
Oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Keep it alive. So you mentioned UT. What made you stay in Texas for university? Did you look at other schools? What was that like? And what was that like for your family to leave Dallas and go to a new city?
Yeah. So I did look at other schools. I knew that I was going to put myself through school. My parents, one of the things that occurred, my parents were entrepreneurs and their clothing line went under. And so as a result, my mom told me right before I was going off to college, hey, you're going to have to help out here. So that definitely informed my decision. I also applied to the University of Texas Architecture School, which was a really competitive program. So when I got in, that is where I chose to go. But I went sight unseen. I'd been to Austin when I was 11, but I hadn't set foot on the campus, at least not that I recall. And so it was a very different experience than what kids are experiencing now in terms of their preparedness and the amount of effort, energy that goes into university. In fact, my parents were really encouraging me. This goes back to the protective nature and the cultural differences. They wanted me to live at home and go to SMU. So they really didn't want me to leave the house, but I was so ready. And once I got into UT Architecture School, that was hard to deny.
So tell us about architecture school. First of all, why did you choose architecture? I mean, I know you obviously had the influence from your parents being creatives themselves, but why specifically architecture? And then tell us about what it was like being at college in Austin in what is not the Austin that we have today, but still it was such a vibrant city. It just had a different personality back then. Talk us through that experience.
I remember as a little girl just always loving buildings, in particular older buildings and houses, and having like a physical reaction in spaces. And I still do. Like I'll walk into a space and I'll be like, oh. And sometimes my hairs will stand up on end, in particular if I go into older buildings in Europe as an example. So I've always had a physical response to architecture. And when I was really little, I remember my parents taking us to downtown Dallas whenever they were going to blow up an old building with dynamite, and we would watch it. And I remember feeling sadness when that would happen. So I started to express a love of houses and architecture at a very young age. And my dad introduced me to a friend of his that was an architect. And so that's kind of how the fire got stoked. I also remember at a really young age, on Sundays, my parents would literally Sunday drive. You know, we'd roll the windows down. My dad would drive the Volvo through beautiful neighborhoods in Dallas. And that's like a core memory as a child. The classical music's blaring, you know, the fall leaves are flowing behind us. My sister is drawing the line down the back seat so I won't cross it. And us just checking out houses the whole time. So that love of houses was in me. And then I thought I was going to become this sort of architect that mixed old and new, like modern, like repurposed old structures. That was kind of why I got into it. And yeah, that was the goal.
That was the goal, but that was not the end result. So
No.
Talk about that experience at UT and what it was like studying architecture, and then what you did either after you graduated from UT or what that journey was like.
Yeah. Well, and I forgot to answer your other question. So Austin, when I got to UT, the population of Austin was just a few 100,000 people. So it was a tiny town. The skyline was not what it is today because there was a city ordinance that no building could be taller than the Capitol. And so it looked very different. It felt like a sleepy town. There were really no good restaurants. For the foodies, we suffered other than like Mexican breakfast and Jeffrey's. There was like nothing in between. And so it was a very different town. Live music was super fun and alive and well. And there were a lot of classic venues like the Backyard and Liberty Lunch that we frequented that was really formative to me socially. In terms of architecture school, it was 40 of us in my freshman class.
Small.
Met my husband the first day of class.
Wow.
Did not start dating until 4 years later, but we became friends from that first day. And if I recall correctly, there were less than 5 women in that freshman class. It was super cool and super intense. Not a whole lot of sleep. Very sleep deprived. It didn't help matters that I worked multiple jobs and eventually in the bar business. And so I was really not prioritizing my sleep or my health, which we can get to in a second. And then it also turned out that calculus is not my jam, in particular calculus for engineering. And I often wonder if I would have gone to architecture school now, if it would be a different story. But back then, I just became very self-aware that while this is an interest and passion of mine, I'm just not good at some critical aspects of it. But I'm also not a quitter. So it took me 4 years to actually admit and drop out of the architecture school program.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So you dropped out. Did you graduate from UT?
No, I'm a college dropout.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you're at UT. You are battling through this degree that is extremely challenging, very technical. We'll get to Jeff at some point because I do want to talk about y'all's love story and how you two ended up becoming husband and wife. But you didn't graduate with your architecture degree.
No.
But you were working these multiple jobs. So what was that transition back and forth between studying to work and what took off where?
Yeah, I would say my college experience was not the typical college experience. A lot of people look back at college with nostalgia, and I look back at it and it was a really hard time in my life. I was super broke. I was always stressed about how to make rent, and I was falling into debt. And I was working multiple jobs and not taking great care of my health and not feeling great. And now the one thing that was going well in my life, though, was I realized I was really good at running businesses and leading people. And I started to turn around restaurants and bars. And it started with El Arroyo. And then back then, the Copper Tank Brewing Company got word of it and recruited me. And I worked at many other establishments like Mezzaluna and others. But those were kind of the two big ones where I really got my experience from a leadership perspective and a P&L perspective in terms of turning businesses around. And then it was actually in the bar business, and I've told this story many times. So for those that have heard it before, I'm sorry, but I was in the bar business that I was recruited to work at Dell. And so in 1999, I was running the Copper Tank Brewing Company as head of their operations. And one of my regulars overheard me speaking Spanish to a customer. And he said, "Wait a minute, you speak Spanish?" And I said, "Yeah, it's my first language." And he said, "Send me your resume. I'm starting a Latin American division." And that man was Ro Para. And at the time, today we call it a chief revenue officer. At the time, he was running sales and marketing globally at Dell. And getting to work at Dell was like winning a lottery ticket. And so I sent him my resume. And what's super interesting is I actually got rejected. So
what?
Yeah, the first group that I interviewed with rejected me, but the internal recruiter and I had a great relationship. And she was like, "I really like you. We're going to find a place for you. Just hang in there. I'm going to keep introducing you to groups." So the original group rejected me for not having enough sales experience because they didn't see my experience in restaurants and bars as sales experience. And so she eventually got me with another group that hired me. But the funny part of this story is inside of a year, I was running the group that rejected me. And then Ro and I stayed close. He kept an eye on me while at Dell. And I spent the first 15 years of my career there. And I now work with his daughter and mentor her, Maddie, which is like an amazing full circle moment. And when I got the job at IBM, I actually called Ro to thank him because he changed my life. That was a sliding doors moment for me. He gave me my very first big shot. That being said, I will say I took a massive pay cut going to work for Dell. It was a huge risk.
Really?
So there was another sliding doors moment going on. My husband and I had broken up. I was heartbroken. A friend of mine was moving to Costa Rica to open a bar and asked me to go with him. And then I got the job offer at Dell. And the job offer at Dell was for $16,500 a year, which was a fraction of what I was making running the bar. And I remember being on the phone with my mom and telling her about it and her saying, take the job at Dell. You need good health insurance.
What a good mother.
Totally. And so I took the job at Dell and even though it was a massive pay cut, I saw the upside in it. I saw the growth potential in it because I'd always prior to that worked for entrepreneurs and owners right underneath them. And there was no growth for me. But at Dell, man, holy smokes, I was starting as a sales rep 1B, the lowest possible grade you could come into that I know of at the company. I wasn't even sales rep 1, sales rep 1B. And so I just saw so much growth potential and I went for it.
So do you think that was one of the first times in your life that you had a really big choice to make? You had a fork in the road. Go to Costa Rica, do this fun, exciting adventure that could go so many different ways, or go take this corporate job that had stability but tons of opportunity. Do you think that was one of the biggest, almost just, life is full of choices, but life paths that you decided to take? Or do you think that there was something else that prepped you to make that choice?
I think there was one right before it, actually. One of my childhood best friends that I've known since kindergarten went to Stanford, and he came back after his first year. And I don't even know if he remembers this, Daniel, but he was just glowing. He had come into his own, was loving it. And we were standing in my kitchen the summer after freshman year, and he was trying to talk me into transferring to Stanford. And I didn't do it because I didn't think I had enough money to afford Stanford, not knowing that Stanford was on a sliding scale. And so again, that's kind of like the thing that happens to first generation kids. They don't know this sort of stuff. And yeah, so I sometimes think about that one. Man, Stanford at that time would have been like also a golden ticket, especially given that I ended up in tech. And my friends that went to Stanford ended up being friends with the Facebook and Google founders and PayPal and so on. And their networks are amazing. So, and they've had tremendous success. So that's another one. That's another sliding doors moment. But, everything, then I wouldn't have met my husband. I wouldn't have had my children. So I don't look back on that with any regret. It's just curiosity.
Everything happens for a reason.
Absolutely.
For sure. So you take this job at Dell. At what point did you decide I'm not finishing my major at UT? Because that's a really big decision as well. I'm investing in myself and my career, and I don't need this 4-year degree to support me in this new path that I'm taking.
Yeah, there were a couple things going on. My health was suffering.
Yeah, so let's talk about your health a little bit.
Yeah, I was having seizures.
Oh, wow.
And so the decision got made for me.
That's scary.
Sometimes things happen for you and not to you. And this was happening for me. I didn't have the courage to quit. But when I started to have seizures, they actually put me on a medication that, 1, made it impossible for me to drive. And 2, I literally had to pull out of classes. And I needed sleep. I needed a better quality of life. I also knew that the bar business wasn't for me over time. There were just aspects of the bar business that didn't align with my values. And so, yeah, it kind of all unfolded. So as I started to take care of my health and I had to pull out of my classes, then this job offer came. It all just kind of happened suddenly. And then I found myself at Dell. And boy, did I carry shame around it. This is something that I didn't actively disclose. If I wasn't asked about it, I wouldn't volunteer. But now I volunteer it because I think it's important to realize that I'm a flawed individual. I'm not perfect.
You're a badass though.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But I want people to know that your path is not always perfect.
Yeah. That's really inspiring for us to hear too, looking, sitting across from somebody that I admire and look up to so much, that you're willing to call out the good points, obviously the highlight reels, but also the really tough parts that got you to where you are today. So it's really refreshing and it's really encouraging. You're at Dell now. What was that like? Dell in the early ages, 99, going into the 2000s, internet.com boom. Describe what that felt like and those first 15 years.
Oh my gosh. Shout out to Wendy, Heido, Carla, my Tokaya, and Anita, because they were part of my training class and we still talk to this day. And I'm really close to Wendy and Heido in particular. And I'm actually godmom to,
oh my God,
to one of Wendy's children, her son, Samuel. So I just want to say that's how formative it was. I have family out of Dell. It was super fun and also super stressful. I mean, working in a call center environment, tethered to a phone, being sedentary all day with the calls coming in is not for the faint of heart. There's a fight or flight that kicks in. And fortunately, I have fight, but there are a lot of people that don't do well in that environment. And then learning to work in Spanish, I realized, because I started in the Latin American division, I've realized that my vocabulary I had never been educated in Spanish. So I didn't have a work vocabulary. I certainly didn't have a technology vocabulary in Spanish. So I had to find my way. And in fact, we had lots of growing pains along the way. I'll never forget, there was a moment. So we were selling computers to people all across Latin America and the Caribbean. And the dialects are different by country. The accents are different by country, not unlike English. But some words in certain countries are used and in other countries are very bad words.
Oh no.
And I will never forget this moment because I was talking to someone and I was basically telling him he could go F his computer when I was trying to say that he could go pick it up, which in Uruguay, I was using the right verb.
Yeah.
But where he was from, which I believe was Colombia, I was using the wrong verb. And I'll never forget Heido coming over and ripping my headset off. And the guy was laughing on the phone at me and I couldn't tell why. And Heido ripped my headset off and was like, "We do not say that in Colombia." And I was just like, oh my gosh. So, I mean, there is full of growing pains, but it was a massive learning experience. And the other thing that really happened was Dell was the first place that really would take a chance on me and where I felt like it was a true meritocracy. It's also one of the most ethical places I've ever worked, which is, I mean, it's just unbelievable in terms of the ethics. There's such a high standard there. It's an intense environment, don't get me wrong. I mean, if you don't hit your numbers, you're out. But it was just an amazing learning ground for me. And, I was a few months in when we got a new general manager for the region. And he said, if anybody has any ideas about how to grow the business, let me know. And I couldn't help myself. I put my hand up, even though I wanted to smack it back down. And next thing I know, I'm meeting with him and his boss and pitching, LATAM specific training and coaching programs and things that we needed to implement. And I'll be damned if they didn't give me that opportunity to do it. And that was my first growth opportunity at Dell. And my whole career at Dell was built on raising my hand and offering to solve problems and being given the opportunity to do just that. And 15 years later, I found that I got the opportunity to work in every single vertical in every part of the globe, across every line of business, from software to hardware to services. And it was a massive, massive education for me, all across the sales function, every type of sales role. And then ultimately, as a marketing leader, as a divisional CMO. So it was an amazing, amazing experience for me. And I have deep relationships from that experience. I have family from that experience. And truly, it was just a massive, massive opportunity in education.
So while you ended up at corporate and you were in a corporate career, you still were an entrepreneur in your own right. You were creating these own roles and you had that entrepreneurial spirit from your parents. But in this new environment and this new way to play and this new way to build your own path and create your own destiny, For listeners that are in these corporate roles, how did you gain the confidence to realize that you had value to share with these leaders? And how did you speak up when it's such a large company and make sure that your voice was heard?
Yeah, it's something within me, Anna, that I can't seem to help. Like I tell the truth.
Yeah.
Good, bad, or otherwise. It's gotten me in trouble before. It's gotten me ousted, right? But I tell the truth. I say it how it is. And I may not always be right, but I'm at least going to express how I feel. And if I see a problem, for me, I get excited because that represents an opportunity to go fix something or go do something. So I just landed in the right environment at the right time where there was appetite for that. So Dell really encouraged an entrepreneurial mindset. They really wanted you to take ownership of not just the business, but of your career. And so it was just a great fit for me in that regard. It wasn't without its challenges. I mean, tech in the 90s and early aughts for a woman and for a Hispanic woman, not that easy. There are not a lot of me around. And I face challenges as well.
Yeah. You always tell me to say the hard thing, even when you don't want to, because that means you're saying it out of love the most. And that was evident in your career. So you were at Dell for 15 years. What was the position that you were last in before you made the move to your next company? And what was that? And how did that happen?
Yeah, I actually had a full circle moment. So it was divisional CMO of Latin America. So I'd run inside sales for the company. And that caught the attention of our chief marketing officer, who began to mentor me. And she recruited me to marketing. She said, Carla, if you ever want to be a CEO, you need to learn how the marketing side works. And she brought me into marketing, and it was like baptism by fire. Like I started marketing as a CMO. And so having responsibility for all the marketing functions. Now, that being said, it was a really special time at Dell because the team that I was a part of are some of the best CMOs out in the world right now. And they all had deep functional expertise in their areas. So whether it was Paul Darcy around demand gen or Allison Dew around just all of marketing, she's just a powerhouse and a powerhouse executive, or Liz Matthews in terms of brand. I could go on, but these folks were kind enough to teach me marketing. And the thing that I got to do in return was teach them sales and to convert it to revenue. So I was able to give back in that way. And these are relationships that I still have. They're still phone a friends to this day, that when I'm running into a challenge, I call them and ask them for advice.
That's only one side of Carla, though. At what point did you start thinking about having a family? And let's weave in Jeff into this picture too. So you said that you met Jeff, your now husband, in college. You all had broken up, gotten back together at some point, and then you have two beautiful children as well. So how did you balance this blossoming career with building a family and creating what is your beautiful family today?
Yeah. Well, I always knew that I wanted to have children, and Jeff is one of the kindest people that you will ever meet. And I knew that he was going to make a great father. So I always knew that was going to be part of the story. I didn't know how. And Jeff and I were on a camping trip in Big Bend about a year or two into being married. And he said, I think it's time for us to start having kids. And I will never forget, it like took my breath away. Like I was like, I got scared.
How old were you then?
Gosh, I would have been 29 or 30. And I remember getting scared. And Jeff is the sort of person that's always been super supportive of me, but kind of let me take lead and make the big decisions. This was the first time in our relationship where he was the one that was taking lead and making the big decisions. So I was just trusted him and was like, okay, then. Little did we know that we would find ourselves pregnant with Quentin weeks later.
Oh, nature had a plan for you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So you had your first child, Quentin, your son. Yeah. Were you at Dell at this point still?
I was.
Yeah.
I actually went into labor at work.
What?
Yeah. I went into labor at work, and I'll never forget it. Again, this just shows you the type of relationships I had at Dell. Jeff was out of town.
Oh, no.
He was on a boys' trip. And I remember being weepy before he left, thinking, I think I'm going to have this baby. And he was like, what? You're 5 weeks out. You're not going to have this kid. And I was like, no, I just feel weird. And he's like, I'm right around the corner. He was on the coast. And sure enough, I went into labor, and I went to just a weekly appointment to get checked, and they admitted me into the labor and delivery ward. And I remember texting my boss saying, I'm not coming back to work. I am in labor. And he came. He showed up.
Wow.
And waited there until Jeff came.
That's special.
Yeah. And then when I actually had Quentin, so many people showed up that they were like, who are you? Are you some sort of celebrity? And I was like, no, I just work in the Latin American division. This is how Latin people roll.
Yeah.
And because it was just like a parade of people coming to the hospital to meet the baby at the hospital, which was super loving and very sweet.
So beautiful to have such support.
Yeah,
from your work family.
Yeah, it was totally awesome.
So did you stay at Dell for much longer after you had Quentin, or when did you make a transition into your next career move?
Yeah, so I had Quentin in 2004 and I stayed at Dell for another 10 plus years.
Wow.
Yeah, so I had Amelia at Dell as well.
No way.
Yeah, and it's interesting this is another interesting part of the story. When I had Q, I did not anticipate to have this response, but I did not want to go back to work. I was in such mad, deep love with this kid that I just wanted to stay home. And that caught me completely off guard because I'd always been super ambitious and driven. And I really grieved going back to work. And I felt like it was out of my control that we had to do it. I was the breadwinner and, everything unfolds for a reason. And I'm super grateful. But that was a super hard transition on me because I just was so in love with him and couldn't imagine being away from him.
How did you balance that when you finally did go back to work? And before even that, how long was maternity leave? And then talk about that balance.
It was a different time. So I only got 12 weeks. I only took 12 weeks.
Whoa.
And Quentin went into a daycare straight away, and I was pumping at work and it was, intense and back on the road and on planes and traveling internationally. So it was intense. And but I will also say for women that are considering having babies that are super ambitious and have big careers, nothing will give you focus and enable you to get shit done and prioritize like having a child. One, it gives you intense purpose. And it just gives you intense clarity in terms of what's important and what's not. And so your meter for BS is like through the roof and you just don't have time for anything that is fluff or stands in the way of what needs to get done. So it's a tremendous accelerator and motivator from a career standpoint, believe it or not, or at least it was for me.
Yeah.
When I had Amelia 3 years later, it was also an intense time. But at that point, I'd done it once. So I kind of knew what I was doing. But again, only 12 weeks. But what those experiences taught me is once I got in a position to actually influence it, I started to begin to offer women in my organization, in particular talent that I wanted to retain, great talent, things like job share programs, or having conversations with them of, hey, you may not know how you are going to react after you have this child. You may want to stay home, or you may want to come running back into the building. No, everybody's different. Or you may get postpartum like I did with Amelia. No one really knows how they're going to respond. So I would start to have the dialogue before they went out on maternity leave and then would keep in touch to see how they wanted to come back. So I introduced the first job share program in the sales organization.
Wow.
And to enable women to work part-time while being in sales. And then I also worked with women to enable them to take more time off if they needed it. So there were people in my organization that took 5, 6, 9 months, that took leaves of absence, but that I secured roles for when they came back based on what they needed and based on what their child needed.
Wow. That's so cool. And it's also so encouraging to hear that you don't have to make a choice between your career and having a family.
Yeah.
I think a lot of young women have that fear that they can't do it all. And while yes, there's obviously sacrifice in there, you still can have a fulfilling career and also be a loving mother and wife. And it's tough. It's not me saying it's easy. I'm not doing it right now, but you've done a beautiful job at this. And it's just so encouraging to see that you don't have to sacrifice your dreams, whether those dreams are dreams of a family or dreams of a career or dreams of being the best partner in the world. You can find a way to lean into these different roles at different times in your life.
Yeah. Although where I did fail, Anna, to be perfectly honest, was the sacrifice I made was myself.
Talk about that.
So I stopped exercising altogether because I felt like I didn't have time. My nutrition was crap. I joke that I was possessed by my husband's children because he loves drive-through food. And suddenly I was eating drive-through food, which was crazy. Like with Quentin, it was Der Wiener Schnitzel. And with Amelia, it was Krispy Kreme. As soon as I gave birth, it was weird. All those cravings went away. So that's why I joke that I was possessed by Jeff's children. I started to realize that it was affecting me in the same way that it did in the bar business with school. The seizure started to come back.
Oh, wow.
And so I realized, okay, wait a minute, I've got to do something here and I've got to focus on my health. And that was when I brought working out back into my life and nutrition back into my life, which had always been a core value. That's something my dad instilled in me. He was always an athlete. And that was our thing, was one of our many things was working out together. When I brought that back, I started to realize that it was giving me energy to be able to give the children, to be able to give my team. And then I went a step further and I actually brought it into the workplace because I started to realize that the people on my team, as they started to have young children, they were letting their health go. And some of them were big time collegiate athletes, Division I college athletes. They weren't working out and they were sacrificing themselves. So I had an offsite at one point with my team and I invited Paul Carozza to be the speaker. And for those that don't know Paul Carozza, from my perspective, he is the godfather of why Austin is a healthy city. So he was a big time runner that put running on the map in Austin and made running cool. And he owned this running store by the trail called Runtex. And running was a thing. Everybody ran in Austin. And so I invited Paul to talk to my team about this program he had called From Still to Active. And his wife, Sheila, had actually experienced a heart issue and actually had died but come back on their kitchen floor. And as part of her rehab, Paul had to learn to train someone from sedentary to active. In the past, they'd always trained like Division I or athletes or Olympians, and he didn't have that same level of empathy from people coming from a sedentary lifestyle to becoming athletes. But he now did and had this new program. And he had been coincidentally working with Michael Dell. I didn't know this at the time. And when I brought him to speak to my team was so moved by his story. And he was so moved by the engagement with my team. He was like, hey, why don't I start training y'all? And I said, sure. So we decided to start a running group first with my team, which then expanded into something we called Thrive, which enabled people to work out at work during work hours twice a day. We had hours where people could go. And this was a big deal because it was a call center where people are metriced by the second, by the minute. And it was really controversial. But I knew that if we invested in people's health, if we brought in healthy food, if we enabled them to work out, that they would be more productive. And something really amazing happened. One, at its peak, we had over 180 people participating. We had 2 people lose over 100 pounds. We had countless ones lose over 15 pounds. We had people that had never been athletes suddenly running 6-minute miles and finding out that running was their thing. Shout out Paul Darcy. And the organization at the end of that year that was sedentary and not growing went from not growing to double-digit growth, double-digit profitability. And the coolest part of the whole thing was the culture that it drove. And because people would see us working out at work, they would want to come join us. So other organizations started to join. Marketing started to join, operations, finance, different organizations, segments at Dell started to join. And the thing that we did not anticipate was the communication that it enabled across different titles and roles. So when you're on a running track, no one has a job grade. Like titled, whether you're an executive or a frontline technical sales manager, doesn't matter. And so the informal conversations that started to happen, the breaking down of rumors, the camaraderie, it was just incredible. And to this day, when people work out at Dell, they will use the hashtag Thrive and tag me in it in social. And I still work out with many of the people from that time. And that was coming up on 13 years ago.
That's so cool. So one common theme that it seems like you have as a leader is the whole person. It's not just the product that or the end result that they're working towards. You actually care about them as a human, which is one of the big reasons why we even struck up our relationship again and finding that back in the workplace, but not just work, in life. That's for another story. But I just love hearing how this has always been you. This has just always been Carla.
Yeah. I mean, I get my fulfillment out of connection. I get my fulfillment out of helping people exceed their hopes and dreams and goals, building big, bold visions for businesses, and then blowing people away when we can actually achieve it or overachieve it. And that requires looking at the whole person. Now, that being said, my approach for a very long time was very masculine, and it was also very fitness oriented in terms of the physical state. What I was not working on was the emotional or the spiritual component of it. So that came later. But I was very highly indexed on the kind of working out, almost to an extreme where I got addicted to it. And I started to beat myself up in the gym and doing like really, really tough workouts and feeling like, if I didn't leave it all on the gym floor, that I hadn't had a good workout. And that's a different story, because what I didn't realize is I was starting to drive up my inflammation and I was messing with my hormones.
Yeah.
And there are things that I learned later on. But yeah, I almost took it to an extreme there for a while.
Yeah. Another reason why we bonded. But again, for another day.
Yeah.
So when did you leave Dell? What was the next big job that you took, and how did you land that next big job?
Yeah, I mentioned my friend Heido. He had left Dell much earlier and had gone to work at Rackspace during their hypergrowth and had tremendous success, and tried to recruit me a few times to go to Rackspace. But I didn't do it out of fear, because things were going so well for me at Dell. I couldn't even envision myself leaving Dell. It just didn't seem possible. But a couple things happened. One, I started to realize that my growth at Dell was reaching a cap, that I was only going to go so far. And I actually, at the end of a performance year, I received a performance review where I was given the feedback that I was too ambitious.
That's insane.
Yeah. And it devastated me, because I thought, oh gosh, what about me has blind ambition? Am I like steamrolling over people? How am I being perceived? And so I called a few of my guy friends at work and I was like, please help me. Is this how you perceive me? Is this how I operate? And one of them said, oh, Carla, they would never say that to a dude. No one has ever said that to me, and I would squash you like a bug for your job. So, and so that made me laugh. And then the second guy pretty much said the same thing. And then that next Monday, I was seeing my boss again, and he said, how do you feel about the feedback that you received? And I said, I've given it some thought. And my response is, God forbid anybody ever tell your daughters that they're too ambitious. And his jaw hit the floor. And at that same time, Heido had been calling again. And he had said to me, Carla, I'm leaving Rackspace. This is your last chance. I'm teeing you up as my backfill. And what are you doing at Dell? You're never going to be the CEO. And it just made me realize that I'd gotten too comfortable. And I decided to push myself outside of my comfort zone and start to have the conversations with Rackspace. And before I knew it, I was running into what was a burning building at Rackspace.
And what was the role that you took there?
So funny. The role that I was hired for was actually as general manager of a region. But the Friday before I was set to start, it leaked that the company was trying to sell. And the stock cratered and the board fractured over it. And the CEO called me and was like, hey, I need a CMO. And I'm wondering if you would pivot. And I said, heck yeah, we pivoted. And I started as CMO of the Americas, but eventually stepped into the global role. And I love a good problem. And I'll never forget it, because the CMO of Dell was like, you don't have to do this. You can stay here with us. And I was like, don't recruit me just yet. I want to go do this. And, or don't acquire Rackspace just yet, because I felt like Rackspace was a great acquisition target for Dell. And I went running, head on into it.
Wow. I don't want to brush over your experience as a woman in corporate America, because I think that's an entirely separate topic that we could talk about for hours.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge it and say you're an inspiration for not just women, but just anybody wanting to grow in their career. But I also am just really keen on tapping into those experiences and conversations that you had. But like I said, that's for another day. I want to stay on this trajectory. So you come over to Rackspace. Tell us about that and how you helped quench this fire and then build the company back up to something great.
Yeah. Well, what an amazing company. It was a feast for the eyes in terms of diversity. It was based in San Antonio. True to form, it was the hard thing. I have a tendency to take on the hard thing. And so I was commuting over 3 hours round trip every day in my car to San Antonio.
That probably took a toll on your health again.
Yeah. I'm real good at that, or I used to be. And it was intense. I mean, because of the state of the business, we were being commoditized by AWS. The company had grown like gangbusters. And then suddenly, boom, growth stopped and started to decline pretty precipitously. And talking to analysts and our board and the market, it became very clear that there was an opportunity for the company to pivot, and that cloud wasn't just about one cloud provider, and that Rackspace was uniquely positioned because of the 3,000 plus cloud engineers that we had to be a service provider for cloud, not just a hosting company, and provide services agnostic of cloud platform. Because what we found was most tech companies had multiple cloud platforms. They had instances of AWS and Azure, sorry to get so technical here, Google Cloud and so on, hybrid, on-prem, off-prem. But the net is there was a real market opportunity to pivot the company. And we did just that. We repositioned Rackspace in a new category. We created a category called Managed Cloud. We were in the upper right-hand quadrant of that. And within weeks of actually repositioning the company, we got an offer to be taken private by Apollo. And that was the end in mind. That was the goal.
Yeah.
We needed to go private to be able to make some bold strategic moves to reposition the company. Now, by the time that happened, it was 2.5 years later when I'd finally vested a year into Apollo buying us. And I was exhausted. I was physically exhausted by driving to and from San Antonio every day. It was a revolving door of executives, looking next to me. It wasn't the same team, and the team was rotating every few months. We went through multiple CEOs, and I was just beat. And I remember turning to my husband and saying, I'm so tired. I've worked since I was 13 years old. I've never had time off.
Wow.
Outside of maternity leave. And mamas, we know that's not time off. And, to his credit, he said, I would live in a trailer with you. It doesn't matter. And I was super scared as the breadwinner to take that step away. But I joke that I stole a year from retirement early. I made the conscious decision to take a year off. And about 30 days later, I came to him and told him I wanted to unenroll the kids from school and travel the world. Because the other thing that had happened in that is I started to become aware of the fact that I had disconnected from my family. I was a ghost in my own home. I was missing out on my kids' childhood, and I lost connection to them and to Jeff and my husband. And so it was setting out to reconnect to my heart and to reconnect to them and to enable them to connect to others. And we call that period of time in our lives Finding Ubuntu, which was inspired by an Aspen Institute reading, which is a philosophy that Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela adhered to. And Ubuntu means multiple things, but it means I am you and you are me. I am you because of you. It means humanity and compassion in the same word. And it was that sort of connection that I was seeking. And so we call that period of our lives Finding Ubuntu.
It's beautiful. So it sounds like it's really hard to balance it all. I mean,
yeah,
just like you experienced, you were peaking in your career, but you were losing your health and the connection to the people you love most. So that's just part of life. It's not all just glitz and glamour all the time. And I think with social media these days, it feels like that's what everyone's experiencing. But let's be real, that's not. And that's becoming apparent in our world. But even, in your career growth and the things that you were able to accomplish, there were sacrifices that were made, but then ways to reconcile it and come out a stronger, better person and even more of Carla and who Carla is today. How old were Amelia and Quentin when you pulled them out?
They were 10 and 13.
Were they so pumped?
It's interesting. Quentin was like, yay, no school. And then he was like, wait a minute, what? We're going to be gone how long?
Yeah.
And then Amelia was super stressed about it.
Oh,
like even
really?
at 10, she was, Amelia
Yeah.
well. So, but even at 10, Amelia was who she is now. So she was like, wait, what about my friends? What about my schoolwork? What about soccer? And even Jeff, he grew up in a family that was military and farmers and school teachers, which is all about like loyalty and duty and responsibility. So even Jeff was like, we can't pull the kids out of school. What about Amelia's soccer practice? And I was like, I didn't see the scouts on the side of the field. So I think we're okay, at least not at 10.
Yeah.
And so to his credit, he was like, even though I'm scared doesn't mean I won't support you. And I laugh because when he told his boss at work, he was like, so my wife is taking the kids and traveling the world and I would like to go with her. But she says she's going whether I go or not,
oh my
which
gosh.
is very me.
That is so funny. I can't wait for us to have Jeff on and just have you two talk about your story. And
oh man, yeah.
And all
I hope
of
he'll
this...
go there and be honest because I'm not the easiest to be married to. I'm a piece of work.
You're a lot of fun though. And
thanks.
you're a lover.
Thanks.
Okay. So I want to have again, we're just having so many fun episodes that we can splinter off into. One fully on Ubuntu, but staying in the career path. So you have this year of exploration and you know that you're going to come back even more Carla, even more inspired to either go back into your career or maybe not. But what was that like coming back after that year off? What were the career choices that you were making? Was there something that you knew you were coming back to? Was there something that you knew you didn't want to come back to? Just talk to us how you got back into corporate after being gone for a year, because I feel like so many people think that if they take a break, they can never come back and that they're ruining their resume that they've been building. And you're an example of, no, sometimes that break is the best thing that you can do for your career and it'll make you a leader into something that you could have never imagined. So yeah, tell us about it.
Especially if you're deliberate and intentional with it, like there's a purpose to it. So I set out to go on 100 professional dates to figure out what it was that I wanted. And so I said yes to everything: running dates, coffee dates, CEOs, investors, recruiters, friends of friends. And I did a couple things with each one, depending on my reaction. And I joke that I had like one of two reactions, either like my hair was standing up on end and I was like super excited, or I wanted to run away screaming. And if I didn't want to run away screaming, then I would ask them to introduce me to 2 more people. And it kind of would grow from there. And during our travels, I would meet with people too. And intermittently when we came back. And something started to happen through these conversations. I started to get clearer on my values and what it was that I wanted. And what I knew was, 1, I want a seat at the table. I have to be on the right side of the closed door, or I'll die on the vine. I have to be where the big decisions are being made. I need to be able to have a huge impact. So that was 1. 2, I care about who I work with and for more than the actual work itself. So try saying that to a recruiter and watch their eyes glaze over. But I love the people that I work with. Like they are family to me. If you're going to spend this much time away from the people that you love, you got to love the people that you're bounding out of bed for every morning. So that was really important to me. 3, I was looking for a platform for doing good. And I had already gone through the first part of the Henry Crown Fellowship program. And I was moving from success to significance to impact. And I wanted to be able to leave this world better. So I was looking for what made sense and what was a platform for doing good. And the last thing was, I'm ambitious. I was owning it.
Yeah.
And so I was the breadwinner. I wanted to grow and be challenged. And so that was important to me too. It had to make career sense. And so I went on those conversations and meeting with people. And then at the end of the year, I reached out to the ones where I felt like I had the strongest connection. There was a little bit of momentum. And I said, hey, I'm going to make a decision by Jan 1. If you're serious, let me see what you have to offer. And 4 offers rolled in.
I love it. You took the driver's seat in this. I think so many people are scared to just ask for what they want.
Yeah.
And you did it.
Yeah. It's wild that it worked out that way. I recently told this story to someone. They were like, wait a minute, what? How did you get the courage to do that? And I was like, I don't know. I just did it.
I love it.
Yeah.
So then you took one of those offers, which was?
It was National Instruments.
Nice.
Which if you would have told me that I would end up at NI at the beginning of this process, I would have been like, game over. My career's over. But because I'd done the values work, it hit all of my values. And the way I realized that was we actually sat down to make the decision as a family. Wow. So picture 11-year-old Amelia, 14-year-old Quentin, Jeff, and they were 4 distinctly different offers. There was what we called the shock and awe offer, which was so big that it was blinding. It was more money than our family had ever seen before, and it was really significant. The second one was NI, which I'll get to in a second, but was a CMO with the potential of running a business as well, which I liked from a growth perspective. And then the third was CMO of a very, very sexy company, which would have given me real cool factor, but was a total shit show under the hood. And then the fourth was a CEO of a small software company that a private equity firm had just purchased on the West Coast and would have required a move. And we're sitting there laying it out, and Jeff and Amelia are like, take the money, take the big offer. And Quentin turns to me and goes, Mom, who do you want to be with every day? And I was just like, damn it.
Boy knows you.
It was the NI people.
Yeah.
There was something about the team at NI. I just felt comfortable. I felt like I could be me. I felt like there were people I wanted to be around. I also loved the remit, the idea of really taking my architecture background and remodeling a company, redesigning a company with them from the ground up, totally modernizing it, shackles off, being able to run a business. As soon as Quentin said that, I knew I had my answer. And it was yet another time in my career where I made a decision not for money. The Dell job was not for money. It was out of, this is what I want to go do. This is who I want to be with.
So you took the job as CMO of National Instruments.
Mm-hmm. And eventually CMO and GM. I ran their portfolio business unit.
Wow. How long were you there for?
I was there for 2 years.
2 years. Mm-hmm. And tell us about that experience. Was it everything that you thought it was going to be? And what did you learn in that position that was different from your previous role?
Wow. So first of all, it was a love in the workplace experience. I'd had those experiences with amazing teams at Dell, and I'd had them at Rackspace, but I had it yet again at NI. It was a really unique experience in that the end in mind was to rebrand the company, but pretty quickly we realized that it wasn't just going to be a veneer, that there was an opportunity, much like Rackspace, to reposition the company. In the case of NI, modernize it. So take it from the 1980s to, at the time, 2018, 2019. And what was super fascinating is early days in, the head of R&D, after a meeting, came to me and he was like, you scare the shit out of me. And I was like, what makes you say that? And he said, I'm afraid that you're going to overpromise on something I can't deliver. And I said, then come do the work with me. And in talking to the CEO, I was like, how about if we build a cross-functional working team to do this work? So we brought in the head of HR, the head of sales, the head of R&D, the CEO, myself, and then we would rotate out a couple of other key folks in the business to keep us honest. And we did the work together. And so what ended up happening was we didn't just rebrand or modernize or remodel the look and feel of the company. We redid the values. We redid the products. We redid the way we worked. We redid the go-to-market strategy. We redid the facilities. So by the time I walked out of NI, it felt like a fresh, young, hip startup. And I'm super proud of the fact that, I can't claim credit for this. Eric, their CEO, achieved this, but they recently sold to Emerson for a significant premium to the stock price, which was like a really huge win for the shareholders. And so I got to believe that in some small way, the work we did really positioned NI for that. So I'm exceptionally proud of the work we did there. And by the way, we took that company from shrinking to double-digit growth. So exceptionally proud of that too.
You light up when you talk about it.
Yeah.
You always smile every time you bring up NI.
Super proud of it. And, it wasn't easy. We had our hard days too. We fought like family. The thing about love in the workplace is you're real with one another. So it wasn't always easy. We irritated each other. We pushed each other outside of our comfort zones, but it was super, super rewarding. And I would do anything for any of those people.
So why'd you leave if you loved it so much?
The big job came knocking.
All right. Well, what was that job?
Yeah. Arvind, the CEO of IBM, called and said, I want you to do at IBM what you did at NI. So Arvind had lived in Austin, had actually grown up on NI products because he's an engineer. And Michelle Peluso, the former CMO prior to me of IBM, and I had gotten to know each other during my year of professional dating. And we really got on great. I love Michelle. She teed me up for the role. And so, they came knocking, and that was just something I couldn't say no to.
Yeah. How did you have that conversation with your family? Or did you just say, this one's happening and I'm going to go for it?
I don't even remember because it was so fast, Anna.
Really?
It happened in what felt like a matter of days. And it's interesting because it wasn't as thoughtful of a decision. And it did rock my family. I mean, I was in New York during the week and living in Austin. It was almost like Rackspace Revisited. I was in New York during the week and living in Austin on the weekends. And it was, during the height of COVID. So when I wasn't in New York, I was on Zoom calls from 7 a.m. until 9:00 p.m, often without a break.
Oh, wow.
So once again, I picked the hard thing and I beat the hell out of myself. And it was probably the most extreme version of that I've experienced in my career. I even lost 17 pounds, most of that muscle.
Oh my God.
Because it was so demanding in that way.
Bye health once again.
Once again, I did it again.
So at IBM, you took on the role as Chief Marketing Officer. Tell us about that time there.
Yeah.
How long were you there for? And just what was that experience like? And how is it different now having this big job?
Yeah.
Obviously, the hours were really intense, but talk about the responsibilities, the decisions.
Yeah.
Just how it changed you as a leader.
I mean, what incredible and brilliant people. I mean, there's over 5 Nobel laureates in their research team. The amount of innovation that comes out of IBM, the world doesn't even know the amount of innovation that comes out of IBM. It's just mind-blowing. And definitely a leader in AI long before OpenAI or any of the other AI companies that have come on the scene. And also the company has a deep heritage in design. So I felt like my architecture background was like super fed in that too. I mean, my office was beautiful. I had a Saarinen table and a Saarinen chair, and all the IBM offices are built by Starchitects and I.M. Pei and Gary and just Mies van der Rohe. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. So the combination of my love of design and growing up in tech, I felt like this was the job I had been raised to do. Like I'd reached the peak of my knowledge of marketing and leadership. And so I was just chomping at the bit for it. I was so excited. And, it was a big remit. It was 7,500 marketers around the globe, responsibility for all of IBM's marketing in every aspect of it. So yeah, it was a big job, but I felt so ready for it and so inspired.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel that throughout the time you were there?
I did for probably the first 9 months, and then it began to unravel. And it was my body that revealed it first. Like if you would have asked me how I felt about it, I would have been like, this is great. Everything's going great. I'm having the time of my life. But my body was revealing me.
How so?
Well, I just was dropping weight like mad.
Yeah.
And there was something that was just not quite right. And while I was operating as my full, unapologetic, authentic self in a big way, like I started to wear my hair curly for the first time. I started to really, I was fully expressing myself, and it was being in a lot of ways well received. But what I didn't recognize is that there was an undercurrent of discontent about it. And it was also tremendous hubris on my part to think that I could come in and do at IBM what I had done at NI. And so, there came a point where I was not the right person for that job anymore, and real heartbreak ensued as a result of that.
Well, I was employee number 267,000 of all 400,000 that was cheering you on and thought you were so inspiring and somebody that I looked up to. And so when I had the opportunity to meet you, it was like meeting a celebrity.
Oh my gosh.
It really was.
Ridiculous.
It was. So I was like, guys, I get to talk to Carla. Everyone was like, what?
That's ridiculous.
It was so fun. And I think we'll wrap close to this because that experience of leaving IBM is one that I think we'll introduce throughout your time as leading Let's Go There, because that's really when I think you're going to go there. And that's a whole different thing that started the trajectory of your spiritual awakening that we talked about on our previous episode. But that could be 10 more hours of us talking and really, really getting into. So
yeah. I mean, I started with reconnecting to myself from a physical health standpoint and then reconnecting to my heart. But what I'd not done yet was connecting to something bigger outside of myself. And that's what we can talk about next. That's what came last.
Well, thank you, Carla.
Thanks.
I feel like I know you even better now. And I didn't even know if that was possible. But every hour with you is my favorite hour. So.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm so honored
that
you
too.
would come work with me.
We're having fun.